I would say one of the very first things is aligning policy and process. A lot of companies say, oh, I got processes. They couldn't tell you what they are. They've never mapped them. So what they think, what the procurement team thinks is a process is very different than what the IT director says is the process he and his guys really and gals really use. People say, oh, I got policies, and they dig up something that has a 2011 date on it. Or maybe they even show you something that's very current that, who knows, maybe somebody in the finance team wrote with somebody in the audit group, except nobody in the rest of the organization, they know about it. They know it's on some shared drive.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a stronger supply chain and stronger procurement for companies running SAP. Today, I have the great pleasure of welcoming Canda. Canda is an experienced CPO and a procurement executive, and she's dedicating this phase of her career to helping companies get to good, especially where they come to this realization that that's not where they are now. They need help. Canda, thank you so much for joining.
Okay, well, thanks, Sean. I'm delighted to be here and excited for the discussion with you and to see where we can move along the never-ending problems that people are encountering on the journey.
That never-ending climb, leaving things better than we found them. I love it. When we talk, either of us, when we're talking with people in procurement, there's this kind of parallel to a social media effect where it feels like everybody else has this grand life and they're going on vacations and whatnot and they've got it so good, and then, oh my goodness, poor us, we don't have a good policy or we don't have good processes and we have no tools and everything's on Excel, and this inferiority complex that some teams have. What do you see, and how do you initially overcome this sense of, oh my God, everyone's got it together and we don't?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that when I start to talk with companies, I first want to hear where they think they are. And then often approach it as, well, let me do some assessing, and then let me tell you where I think you are. And one of the most interesting things is to see how close or how far apart their view and my view are. And it's certainly not to say that my view is the only view, but I find that people often get a bit myopic about where they are. And they either think that they are at a very, very early sort of immature part of the stage, or they think, frankly, more often than not, that they're much further along the maturity curve than they really are. And I find that companies, and by the way, some of them are pretty big-sized companies, think they're further along than they are. And some of it is because they aren't even sure what good should look like.
Yeah.
They and though I do agree with you, there are equally companies who think, oh my gosh, we're doing a terrible job, because they go on LinkedIn and they see all kinds of flashy stuff, and they think, oh, we don't have that.
Yep.
And they don't realize that some of those companies have been at this for decades. Some of those companies are very different than they are from an industry segment, from a structure, from an ownership, from a funding perspective, and that some of those companies may have just gone after the newest shiny object they could find, and that it's really not helping their outcomes.
And when you go to some of the conferences, you hear sometimes the shiniest, best parts of the success stories. And unfortunately, what we really learned along the way sometimes gets left out. I guess one of the things that I find remarkable about it is the way sometimes 5-10 minutes into a conversation, somebody starts apologizing because they don't have this. And I don't just mean Canadians, because that's kind of a Canadian thing to do, to apologize, but I mean like people from Texas apologizing because they don't have it together as good as they think they should. I love the sense of, don't worry, nobody's really got it all together. And there's a handful of companies that are out there that are very, very mature, but that is not the norm. That's the outlier.
Right. You're absolutely correct. There's a lot of, what is that, the imposter syndrome that
Yes.
goes on where people, they don't realize that where they're at may in fact be a lot better position than they think they're in. And a lot of it is they don't know, not only do they not know where they are in the continuum, they don't know what the rest of the continuum could look like.
Yes. And those to me are the scariest ones, because it's one thing for somebody to feel inferior, that they don't have it all together, but they're working on it. It's a very different and very scary thing for people that feel like what they're doing right now is fine, it's good enough. But those are often the same people that don't know what good looks like. So they think whatever they're doing now is great because that's what they know and that's the way it's always been.
So that reminds me of an expression that my grandmother used to say. By the way, she was born in the 1800s, so I realize this is out of context maybe. But if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten.
Yeah.
And I think
So true.
I think it's very, very true as we look at how companies and how leaders are seeing their own current state and where they see their future state and what their aspirational future state is and what their realistic future state is. Sometimes the easy thing to do is to say, well, what I'm doing must have good enough. And therefore, it may be, but they will therefore never get very much different than what they've been getting.
And then the next frequent excuse is, I'm too busy to make it better.
Yes, and but I don't have any extra funds. There's no budget. So even if I want to do something, I can't. And again, this becomes reasons why not.
Yep. And those reasons why not, those excuses are just like how people get fit or they don't.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
It's the same thing. There's always another convenient excuse. One of the things that I remember when I had the privilege of spending a year working in internal audit for a man named Bill, wonderful, wonderful mentor and leader. And one of the things that I took away from that is the contrast between people who feel like internal audit is the boogeyman and people who feel like they are there to help. And sometimes it's the way the audit team shows up, and
Right.
sometimes they don't help themselves. Procurement is guilty sometimes of the same thing. If I'm here for procurement, I'm here to help you. Let move out of the way. I will do this right. And sometimes that's the wrong attitude. And by sometimes, I mean like 99% of the time. But if there's a symptom of the good is good enough, or what I've got now is good, it's probably, you think internal audit is the boogeyman, isn't it?
Absolutely. That reminds me of the experience I had some years ago. I was brought into a company to lead procurement and to really lead them through a transformation. And within the first couple of months, as I recall, there was a big internal audit going on. And the team that I was now the leader over were both angry and in a panic. Why the heck do we have to deal with these people from internal audit? Oh my God, they come in, like once a year, we have to take time out of our job. They do this, they ask all kinds of questions, they want to see all kinds of documents or, paper trails and work papers. And my response was, these should be some of our best friends. These are not adversaries. Because guess what? There is an external auditor. The ISO auditor is going to come in soon enough. And believe me, they are going to come in with a different approach than your internal audit team. Your internal audit team is here to help you identify the right risks, prioritize the risks, work through with the company internally to say, and of these risks, what response should we or should we not have? They're part of a team, and we need to be partnered with them. And I will say that after a couple of years, there was a really great relationship between procurement and the internal audit team, to the point that the head of internal audit actually said to me, wow, you're one of the, we like working with you because you guys kind of embrace us. You now say, you come to us, some of your team members will come and say, I think we may have a riskier area here. We're not up for an audit. Can you just look at this and tell us, do we need to tighten up a little bit? But boy, the first reaction was, oh my God, heck, stay away from us.
Yeah. And if somebody's holding up the garlic, and a cross and saying, get away, then that is definitely the wrong attitude, especially for teams that are strapped for time and strapped for budget. And here's somebody who's legitimately there to help try to at least identify and even help a little bit to make things better. They might not be able to execute on things to make it better,
Right.
but they can help be that sounding board to help you see problems and risks that maybe you didn't realize were there.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just helps the whole company get better. That kind of big risky things happening, this idea of some of the teams that maybe they don't know what good looks like because they haven't gone to some conferences, they haven't been watching YouTube or LinkedIn or places to go and see some examples of what good looks like. Some of them have some of the biggest, scariest, riskiest things that are going on, and they're just merrily barreling through it. I have to imagine you've got a fun story of an example of, I can't believe that just happened.
Well, I have lots of stories. I have to think of one that I can actually tell. But I think an example that I would give, and I'm going to kind of change it around from what really happened to, protect the innocent and all that sort of stuff. But
Yep.
I have seen a situation where a procurement department thought that they really had good controls. They thought that as they had done their system implementation, they had really mapped how the system handled separation of duties to how their policies intended for it to be. And there was an oversight. It was a scenario that nobody ever thought to check. And the scenario had to do with how one employee who was going to be on vacation or something could delegate their responsibilities to another employee. Right? Somebody had to be able to go on the system and do whatever the first person did. And the gap that had not been considered was, what if that the person delegated to the person who actually was on the other side of the separation of duty role? And nobody considered it. And to just sort of spin to the end of the story, one person ended up being criminally prosecuted. What it immediately pointed out for the procurement team, for the finance team, for the internal audit team, was we have to think differently about the little nuances. Right? We take care of the 100,000-foot view of that, things like separation of duties and, managing risk. There's a point, particularly for a public company, where you have to say, we really need to, number one, we've got to learn from our mistakes. We've got to continue to think and work proactively with our internal audit team to say, what are the scenarios that we may not have included? And this does involve time and resource internally, but believe me, it was way less than having to go through the very publicly criminal litigation aspects that arose.
Yeah, finding out later that somebody was delegated the authority to create and approve their own transaction, and that, first of all, mistake number one, it's also very difficult to help make sure that everybody in the team would do the right thing even when no one's looking. Because there are some small teams where you can get away with that.
Yes.
But not for long.
That's right.
And
Well, and thank heavens not for long. The good usually wins out.
yes, exactly. Thank goodness. So when you're thinking about a common theme among organizations as a gauge or maybe the first step that you help a lot of organizations take? What's one of those common themes of, hey, we're trying to get to good, we're trying to figure out where to start? What's the one of the first things that you recommend people do on their never-ending climb to strengthen their own procurement team and maturity and so on?
I think that one of the first things is that people have to be willing to become very self-aware. And I don't mean that necessarily on an individual level, but on a corporate level, an
Yeah.
organizational level. And that you have to be willing to admit that what you've always done may not be bad, but it may not be um, good, and that it almost always can be improved upon. And if you don't start with an openness to embrace the fact that no matter where we are, we can get better, or we should be open to getting better. Um, my experience is that if there's not that corporate openness, and yes, it's got to be from the head of procurement or the head of accounts payable, whoever you're dealing with, but it's also got to be at the C-suite. There has to
Yeah.
be an organizational acceptance that we are on, to your point, a never-ending journey, and we want to be on it. Because the minute we stop taking the next step, the minute we say we're done with the journey, well, I'm sure there's some metaphors about what that means.
Yep. Yeah, there's people that would say if you're not growing, you're dying. And the other thing that comes to mind is no names mentioned, but a very famous company that was super successful as $100 million company and grew like wildfire, became $1 billion company, and they still are stuck. And at the executive level, it's actually quite scary. And disclosure, I do not own shares in this company, nor would I buy them right now. The executive suite that had come up from the 100 million to the billion are so high on what they're doing must be right because they got them to a billion, but they have forgotten to remember that what got them here won't get them there to the next tier that they're trying to unlock, and that next step to get better, to unlock the next thing. They have become the ceiling on their own business,
Right.
and they have stopped being open to new things because what they're doing right now is working just fine. That, I think that attitude epitomizes what you were just describing of needing to be open to better, continuous improvement, and that what got us here won't get us there. So they have stalled out. They
And
really have.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Sean. And it really goes, I think, to one of the things that I talk to clients about, which is you have to have that the horizon is not a fixed point. The horizon is only as far as you can see.
Yep.
And the further you go, you get a new horizon. And you have to continually be saying, where is my horizon now? And are there things that are going to obscure my horizon and bring it a little bit closer towards me? And so you have to constantly be willing to know that your horizon is not a fixed point. You want to keep expanding it and extending it, but there may in fact be times outside your control where your horizon kind of comes back at you, comes back towards you a little bit, and you have to adjust
Yeah.
and make some changes in order to start having the horizon progress again.
I love it. I love it. There's so many good things there. When you're helping somebody and they've gotten past the right mindset, the right openness, what are some of the basic foundational things that people often don't have in place that become one of the first steps that you help them with?
I would say one of the very first things is aligning policy and process. A lot of companies say, "Oh, I got processes." They couldn't tell you what they are. They've never
All
mapped
bad.
them. So
Yeah.
what they think, what the procurement team thinks is a process is very different than what the IT director says is the process he and his guys really and gals really use. Um, People say, "Oh, I got policies," and they dig up something that has a 2011 date on it, and or maybe they even show you something that's very current that Who knows? Maybe somebody in the finance team wrote with somebody in the audit group, except nobody in the rest of the organization, they know about it. They know it's on some shared drive. But the processes that are being used have nothing to do with the reality, has nothing to do with the policy intent. And so one of the first things that I start with is, what are your policies? Do they exist? Sometimes no. Do you have them? Are they good? And now, what are your current processes? And almost always there is a mismatch. And so a lot of times one of the very first tasks becomes, is the policy what you want? Because it may be that the executive suite says, well, actually, no. What do you mean that, it takes over $1 million before the CFO has to sign off on this? Okay, we need to change the policy. Now we need to go back and figure out the processes. And then once you do all that, you have to look at systems and tools and say, and how do those help enable, help support, help govern and control the processes that support the policy? So it's like a series of building blocks.
I love it. I love the connection, the alignment of where we're going with the policies that are meant to help reinforce that and the processes that we execute regularly to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
Canda, I really appreciate you joining today, and I hope everybody has been able to share in Canda's wisdom and take multiple things away from today's episode. And I hope you join again next week for another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement for companies running SAP. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Sean.